April 2025 marked the end for some of the most high-profile prisoners across the United States. But what baffles me most is this. Many of these criminals were allowed to live for more than a decade behind bars, while the lives they destroyed were cut short in a single night. They robbed families of mothers, sons, daughters, yet they got to file appeals, speak final words, and in some cases even be heard. Meanwhile, their victims? Silence forever. Without wasting much time, let's begin. Welcome to Criminal's Profile. Number 1. Micheal Anthony Tanzi. It was April 25th, 2000. Janet was spending her lunch break as she always did, quietly, alone, reading in her van outside the Miami Herald, where she worked as a production supervisor. She was known for being dedicated, dependable, and fiercely private. But that day, a man approached her window. He asked for the time, then a cigarette. Then he forced his way in. That man was Micheal Anthony Tanzi, just 28 years old at the time, already carrying the weight of a violent past. He was armed with a razor blade. He bound and gagged Janet using rope and duct tape. Then he drove, nearly 150 miles south, deep into the Florida Keys. Along the way, he used her ATM card to withdraw money from several machines. He even stopped to buy more duct tape and a fresh razor. All the while, Janet remained in the vehicle, tied up, terrified, hoping to live, but Tanzi never intended to let her go. When they reached Cujo Key, in a remote spot off Blimp Road, he made his decision final. He strangled her, left her body in a mangrove thicket, then fled to Key West like nothing had happened. 2 days later, on April 27th, he was arrested while casually shopping for new clothes. Police found him with Janet's van keys, her ATM card, and receipts from the withdrawals he made. He confessed immediately, not just to Janet's murder, but also to the 1999 killing of Carolyn Holder, a 37-year-old woman from Brockton, Massachusetts. She had been stabbed and strangled inside a laundromat. Tanzi never stood trial for Holder's death. Prosecutors in Florida already had what they needed. In 2003, he pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, kidnapping, armed robbery, and carjacking. The jury unanimously recommended death, and the judge agreed. Over the next 22 years, Tanzi sat on death row. He filed appeal after appeal. In his final years, his legal team focused on his health, arguing that his morbid obesity and hypertension would make lethal injection unusually cruel. They claimed that the sedative might not work properly on his body, causing him to feel pain during the execution. With all that, the courts weren't convinced. His final appeals were denied, and the execution date was set. On April 8, 2025, at Florida State Prison, Tanzi faced the last few minutes of his life. He requested a final meal: bacon, a candy bar, and ice cream. Childlike, almost strange considering the brutality of his crime. In his final statement, he apologized to the families of Janet Acosta and Carolyn Holder. Then he quietly recited a Bible verse. As the drugs flowed into his system, witnesses said his chest heaved repeatedly. After about 3 minutes, he stopped moving. Tanzi was pronounced dead at 6:12 p.m. He had spent 25 years on death row. He was 53 years old at the time of his execution. Number 2. James Lee Osgood. It was October 18, 2010, when 44-year-old Tracy Lynn Brown, also known by her maiden name Tracy Willman, failed to show up for her shift at a nursing home in Chilton County, Alabama. Tracy was newly divorced, rebuilding her life, one quiet day at a time. She'd just gotten her own place and was saving up to visit her daughter in Arizona. When her employer couldn't reach her, he requested a welfare check. What officers discovered inside her home would later be described as one of the most disturbing crime scenes in county history. Tracy was found dead, her body surrounded by signs of a brutal, prolonged, and intentional attack. But what made it even worse was the betrayal behind it. Tracy had been lured into the trap by someone she trusted, her own cousin, Tonya Renee Van Dyke. Tonya was in a relationship with 40-year-old James Lee Osgood, a man with a long history of violent crimes. Together, they had developed a twisted obsession with torture scenes from Hollywood movies. What started as fantasy eventually became a plan, and they chose Tracy to act it out. On the day of the murder, Osgood and Van Dyke entered her home and found Tracy lying down. They launched a savage assault, forcing her into degrading acts. Osgood beat her viciously. Then, when they were finished torturing her, he slashed her throat with a box cutter and stabbed her multiple times until she was dead. They left her body where it fell and walked away. Police launched an investigation that same day. Very quickly, suspicion turned toward Tracy's family. When detectives searched Osgood's home, they found bloody clothing and the murder weapons. While in custody, Van Dyke confessed in detail. She identified Osgood as the killer and described the plan they had both created. When interrogated, Osgood confirmed it all. He recalled how Tracy begged for her life and how he apologized to her as she died. "I told her I was sorry," he said. "I told her to stop fighting, that it would be easier that way." In 2014, Osgood was convicted on 2 counts of capital murder, murder during assault and murder during sodomy. But in 2016, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals overturned his sentence due to jury instruction errors during the penalty phase. Osgood was granted a new sentencing hearing, but he didn't want it. In 2018, he waived his right to a jury and asked the judge to sentence him to death once again. He told the court, "I believe in an eye for an eye." The judge agreed. He was transferred to Holman Correctional Facility, where he spent the next 7 years on death row. Though he filed a few appeals early on, by 2024, he stopped all legal efforts. "I don't want to waste anyone's time," he told reporters. "I believe my life should end for what I've done." Before his execution date, he asked prison officials if he could donate bone marrow to his sister. The request was denied, so he waited. On April 24, 2025, Osgood was served his final meal: fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and chocolate cake. That evening, as he lay strapped to the gurney, he turned to the witnesses and spoke her name for the first time in 15 years. "Tracy, I apologize. I'm sorry for what I did." At 6:35 p.m., James Lee Osgood was pronounced dead by lethal injection. He was 55 years old. His accomplice, Tonya Van Dyke, pleaded guilty in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. She was sentenced to life without parole. She will die in prison. Number 3. Moises Sandoval Mendoza. In the early hours of March 18, 2004, a horrifying crime shook the quiet community of Farmersville, Texas. 20-year-old Rachel O'Neal Tolleson, a young mother battling through a difficult divorce, vanished from the home she shared with her 6-month-old daughter Avery. Later that morning, Rachel's mother arrived at the house. What she found was chilling. Avery was alone in her crib, crying uncontrollably. The back door stood wide open, and inside the bedroom were unmistakable signs of a violent struggle. The mattress had been thrown off its frame, the headboard was splintered, furniture knocked out of place, and papers were scattered across the floor. But Rachel was nowhere to be found. The local police immediately launched a search, and suspicion quickly turned toward 20-year-old Moises Sandoval Mendoza, a former high school acquaintance of Rachel's. He had recently been released on bail for a robbery charge and had attended a party at Rachel's home just days before her disappearance. As investigators pieced together the events of that night, a disturbing picture emerged. Mendoza had entered her home through the unlocked back door while Rachel and her baby were asleep. He abducted her, leaving Avery behind in the crib. He forced Rachel into a vehicle and began driving. Along the way, he turned violent, choking her until she lost consciousness. He drove her to an isolated area near his home. When she regained consciousness, Mendoza repeatedly assaulted her, then strangled her again. But this time, he took it further, brutally using a knife until she died. Days later, he returned to the scene, wrapped Rachel's remains in a tarp, and moved her body to his cousin's land. He tried to burn the evidence by setting her remains on fire before dumping them into a nearby creek bed. Despite his attempts to cover his tracks, the truth quickly unraveled. Unluckily, Mendoza confided in a friend, who immediately reported him to the police. He was arrested the next day. During his interrogation, Mendoza claimed Rachel had willingly left her house with him to buy cigarettes, but no one believed it. On March 23, 2004, investigators discovered Rachel's burnt remains in the creek bed. Dental records confirmed her identity. In 2005, Mendoza stood trial for capital murder in Collin County. Prosecutors revealed a disturbing history of violence, assaults on his own mother and sister, and a prior attack on a 14-year-old girl. A psychologist testified that Mendoza showed signs of emotional immaturity, manipulation, and deep-seated anger issues. On June 29, 2005, the jury found him guilty and was sentenced to death. Nearly 2 decades later, after exhausting every appeal, including claims of poor legal defense, the U.S. Supreme Court denied his final petition. The Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles also rejected his clemency request. On the evening of April 23, 2025, Moises Sandoval Mendoza was executed by lethal injection at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville. When asking for his final words, he apologized to Rachel's family, acknowledged the pain he caused, and addressed his own loved ones in Spanish with messages of peace. He did not request a last meal, as Texas no longer honors that tradition. At 6:40 p.m., Moises Sandoval Mendoza was pronounced dead, just 19 minutes after the injection began. He had spent 20 years on death row. At the time of his execution, he was 41 years old. Number 4. Mikal Deen Mahdi. Mahdi was born in Virginia on March 20, 1983. His childhood unraveled early. His father, a Marine Corps veteran, bounced between jobs and courtrooms. His mother walked out on the family when Mahdi was just 3 years old. By 9, he was diagnosed with major depressive disorder and institutionalized after threatening to end his life. From there, the downward spiral accelerated. As a teen, Mahdi racked up multiple charges for breaking and entering, eventually landing in juvenile detention. He later earned his GED and briefly enrolled in community college. But by age 21, his path had already twisted beyond repair. Between July 14th and 17th, 2004, Mahdi committed a string of violent crimes across 3 states: Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. It started in Virginia. During a drug dispute, Mahdi allegedly murdered a man named Greg Jones. Police recovered a knife from Mahdi's home, and DNA tests linked it to the victim. Although he confessed, and he was never prosecuted for the crime. The next day, Mahdi stole his neighbor's car and a firearm, swapped the plates, and drove to Winston-Salem, North Carolina. There, he entered a convenience store for a beer. When the storekeeper, Christopher Boggs, asked for ID, Mahdi pulled the trigger, firing multiple times and killing him. He tried opening the register but failed, took his beer, and fled. By July 17th, Mahdi had reached South Carolina. He carjacked a man named Corey Pitts, changed the license plates again, and kept driving until he reached Calhoun County. At a rural gas station, his debit card kept failing. The attendant grew suspicious and called 911. Mahdi ran, disappearing into a nearby property owned by Captain James Myers, a veteran officer with the Orangeburg Department of Public Safety. When Myers returned home from a birthday outing with his family, Mahdi ambushed him. He shot the officer 9 times using one of Myers' own guns. Then he poured diesel on the body, set it ablaze, and drove off in Myers' unmarked police truck, loaded with government-issued firearms. His run ended 4 days later in Florida. Mahdi was spotted driving the stolen police vehicle. After a short foot chase, he surrendered. Authorities found stolen weapons in the car. He was extradited to South Carolina and charged with capital murder. In December 2006, Mahdi pleaded guilty to the murder of Captain Myers. Judge Clifton Newman handed down the death sentence, citing Mahdi's complete lack of remorse and the brutal nature of the crime. In 2011, he was also sentenced to life without parole in North Carolina after pleading guilty to Boggs's murder. But even prison didn't stop the violence. In 2009, Mahdi and another death row inmate, Quincy Allen, attacked a correctional officer during an escape attempt. They stabbed the guard repeatedly with handmade knives. The officer survived but suffered permanent psychological trauma. No new charges were filed. Mahdi already faced execution. As the years passed, Mahdi's legal team fought to overturn his sentence. They cited his mental health, childhood trauma, and racial disparities in capital punishment. His clemency petition was denied. The courts upheld the death penalty. When it came time to choose between lethal injection, the electric chair, and the firing squad, Mahdi chose the latter. His attorney called it the lesser of three evils. On the day of his execution, Mahdi made no final statement. He requested a final meal of ribeye steak, sautéed mushrooms, collard greens, broccoli, cheesecake, and sweet tea. At 6:01 p.m., the shots rang out, and just like that, it was over. Mikal Deen Mahdi spent 18 years on death row. He was 42 years old at the time of his execution, becoming only the second person in South Carolina and the fifth in US history to be executed by firing squad since 1976.